Thanks for tuning in at Brackies.
Hello everyone and welcome to this exclusive interview with the guy behind 31 games in 31 days. He's called Victor, aka Zeppelin Captain, and he's just made his own blog featuring the 31 games. So welcome to you, Victor. Tell us, how long have you been making games?
Hello. Well, I've been making games for about 6 years, and I've been making most of them in Game Maker, just small games in my spare time. And after, at some point I wanted to move on from Game Maker, and so I started learning Flash and using ActionScript, and at some point I put Flixel in there to use as a library. And I also took half-year class in Java programming, but I've never actually made any games in that since I decided to move back to Game Maker after trying out Java.
Cool, so you've been making games for quite some time. This project you've started, it's really interesting to me, the nature of it. Could you tell us more on how you came up with the concept, like the reasoning behind the idea?
Well, half a year ago, I tried out how fast I could make games in Game Maker, and I tried doing these games which I called 15 minutes project, where I made a few games, something like 7 games. And so I realized that it was actually possible for me to make one of these very quick games. I could actually make one of those every single day. And so because I wanted the practice and because I wanted to try out if I liked making games for a long time, so at the end of September, I kind of just decided out of nowhere that now was the time for me to try making games for a full month and see if I could actually finish this idea of mine.
Turns out you could, but maybe you could elaborate on your experience with Game Maker as a tool, like the goods and the bads. Did you ever meet any limitations throughout when making these games?
Well, the main good thing about Game Maker is how easy it is to use and how quick it is to use, which was, of course, perfect for this project, because I could make games in a very short time and still have quite a bit of functionality in them. The bad things about Game Maker are mainly its limitations, in that it is very bad at making 3D games, for example. So if I wanted to make a 3D game, I would probably start learning Unity. But for this purpose and for most 2D games, I think Game Maker is quite enough.
Definitely agree with you. To those of you out there who think that Unity can be quite the challenge, Game Maker is a great free tool unless you want to publish to extreme platforms like mobile and so on. One thing that fascinates me is how you're just able to sit down and force yourself actually to come up with some kind of idea, some kind of mechanic that just works. And maybe you could give me some insight on what do you think when you sit down to make this game? How do you brainstorm the mechanics and from there start building the game?
The way I do it is that I make sure that I have some time where I won't get interrupted and where I have time to be alone. And I sit down and I start thinking. Sometimes I put on some music, which helps often. But I sit down and then I start thinking about these very abstract things, like abstract things interacting with each other, like big buildings growing out of walls and big circles hitting them. And I just let my brain go wild with everything that I can think of. And then at some point, if I think of something that I think is interesting, I kind of try to condense that into something that I could make in Game Maker, into a mechanic that could work. Then when I have that mechanic, I I can pretty quickly tell from experience if it will be any fun and if I will actually be able to make it. If it doesn't meet these two criteria, I scrap it immediately and I try to think of something new. But when I have something that has passed these two main criteria, I then start thinking about a goal for this mechanic, because often I'll have thought of something like an interesting way to move around, but then I because I want to make games and not just funny ways of moving around, I then try to think of a goal for this and something that you can do, like collect something or avoid something, and those goals are often very simple because because I have to make something quick, and that's why many of these games are score based or have very quick levels with a very simple goal.
Right. I mean, your brainstorming method seems really effective. It must be, since you've completed this project. But something I often see when people start making games is that they start out by saying that it should accomplish this, it should include this and have this and that. And what you really need to do is just let your brain go wild, as you said. Just come up with something that you know you can create, and then later try to accomplish goals with it. So not build up too many criteria in your head which the game has to fulfill, because then you can just brainstorm and you will never really reach that goal. And also, it's not about what the first prototype looks like, but because that's always gonna suck. But it's really about taking something that you think could be good and then just building on top of it and building until it finally looks polished, because you can't expect it to be with the first prototype. So what really got me into making games was the idea of being able to combine hobbies. I've always been this hobby person, and I could suddenly make music, design and program and all of this and combine it into one piece. But what do you find most interesting about the process of making these smaller games? Is it problem solving, coming up with mechanics? Shoot.
Right now, the most interesting thing about making games for me is coming up with mechanics. Because when I have made a mechanic and I've implemented it for the first time, when I then boot up the game for the first time and see how it actually works out, I really understand a word that a lot of game developers use, which is exploring, that they feel that they're exploring a mechanic. I really understand this the first time I booted up, because it's like I'm exploring this whole new world that I've just created in a way.
So what's your next big project? Are we gonna see 100 games in 100 days, or do you have something more specific that you can tell us about? What's the next big thing from Mr. Zeppelin Captain?
Well, actually, I have something very different in mind. I am still going to work in Game Maker and make something 2D, but my next project the most important thing for me right now is that I'll be able to make something where I focus on the details and go into more depth with the project. And more specifically, the idea I'm working with right now is kind of a 2D version of Proteus, with a more heavy focus on interaction, if that makes any kind of sense.
It does, definitely, but it looks like we are running out of time. So basically, if you want to play Mr. Captain's games, please visit his website, links on the screen and in the description, or his Twitter, again, screen description. And thank you for participating.
And thank you for having me. Enjoy the games, everyone.